Sean Diddy Combs has been a giant in the music world for decades. He is a producer, a rapper, an entrepreneur, and a cultural icon. He built an empire from the ground up, starting with his record label, Bad Boy Entertainment, in the 1990s. This label launched the careers of legendary artists like the Notorious Big, Mary J. Blige, and Usher. Many of us watched his rise. We saw him go from a young, ambitious producer from Harlem to a global superstar with incredible influence. He wasn't just making music, he was shaping the culture of hip-hop and beyond. His name became synonymous with success, luxury, and the power to make dreams come true for aspiring artists. His influence extended far beyond the recording studio. Diddy created fashion lines like Sean John, which became a staple in urban wear and even won prestigious awards. He launched a successful fragrance line and later made a huge impact in the spirits industry with Rock vodka. His business ventures turned him into a billionaire, a symbol of what could be achieved with hard work and a sharp mind. He hosted lavish parties, appeared in movies, and was a regular fixture on television. To many, he was the embodiment of the American dream, a man who had conquered every industry he touched and built a legacy that seemed untouchable and permanent. Through it all, Diddy maintained a public image of a charismatic and powerful leader. He was known for his relentless drive and his famous motto, "Can't stop, won't stop." He mentored young talent and often spoke about the importance of black excellence and ownership. He was a father, a businessman, and a figure who commanded respect in almost any room he entered. His parties in places like Miami and St. Bart's were legendary, attended by the biggest names in entertainment, sports, and business. For a long time, the story of Diddy was a story of triumph against the odds, a narrative of pure, unadulterated success that inspired millions. But behind the curtain of fame and fortune, a different story was brewing. Rumors and whispers had followed him for years, but they were often dismissed as the price of fame. However, in late 2023, those whispers grew into a roar that could no longer be ignored. A series of shocking allegations began to surface, threatening to bring down the entire empire he had so carefully constructed. The man who seemed to have it all was suddenly facing a battle for his freedom and his reputation. The world watched, stunned, as the icon found himself at the center of a storm that would lead to one of the most high-profile trials of our time. The legal troubles for Sean Combs began to escalate dramatically in November 2023. His former partner, the singer Cassandra Cassie Ventura, filed a bombshell lawsuit. She accused him of a decade of horrific abuse, including rape and sex trafficking. The details were graphic and disturbing. Just one day after she filed the suit, it was settled out of court for a reported $20 million. While Combs denied the allegations, the lawsuit opened the floodgates. Soon, more than 50 other people came forward with their own civil lawsuits, painting a dark picture of a man who allegedly used his power to exploit and abuse others, including minors. The situation took a very serious turn on March 25, 2024. Federal agents from Homeland Security investigations raided Combs' lavish homes in Los Angeles and Miami. The raids were part of an ongoing federal investigation into sex trafficking. News helicopters broadcasted the dramatic scenes to the world, showing law enforcement seizing computers, phones, and other evidence. This was no longer just about civil lawsuits. It was a major criminal investigation. The public was then shocked again in May 2024 when CNN released a 2016 hotel video. It clearly showed Combs physically assaulting Cassie Ventura, dragging her, kicking her, and throwing things at her. He later admitted on Instagram that his actions were inexcusable. The investigation culminated in his arrest. On September 16, 2024, federal agents arrested Sean Combs in Manhattan. The charges against him were outlined in a sealed federal indictment. The next day, the indictment was unsealed, and the world learned the specific criminal charges he was facing. The government was accusing him of running a criminal enterprise. The charges were severe and carried the potential for a long prison sentence. The man who once seemed untouchable was now facing the full weight of the U.S. justice system, and the details of the indictment were chilling for many who had followed his career. The federal prosecutors laid out 5 serious criminal counts against him. These were not minor offenses. They were charges that spoke to a pattern of alleged criminal behavior. The charges were 1 count of racketeering conspiracy, which suggested he ran his organization like a criminal gang, 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, one related to Cassie Ventura and another to a second woman, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, also known as violations of the Mann Act. These charges set the stage for a dramatic and closely watched trial that would determine his fate. The federal trial of Sean Combs began in May 2025 in a Manhattan courtroom. It lasted for 7 long weeks and captured the nation's attention. The prosecution's goal was to prove that Combs was not just a powerful executive, but the leader of a criminal enterprise that exploited women. To do this, they called over 30 witnesses to the stand. The most powerful testimony came from his accusers, including Cassie Ventura and another woman identified only as Jane. They gave emotional and graphic accounts of their experiences, describing forced group sex sessions which were allegedly called freak-offs, as well as physical violence and constant psychological control. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence to support their case. Jurors were shown the disturbing 2016 hotel surveillance video of Combs assaulting Ventura. This video was a key piece of evidence because it offered a visual confirmation of the violence described by witnesses. Prosecutors also played private videos of the freak-offs, hoping to show the jury the environment of coercion that Combs allegedly created. A former assistant, identified as Mia, also testified, telling the court about how she was allegedly forced to organize these events and procure women for Combs and his associates. The prosecution argued that this was not a consensual lifestyle but a criminal operation. On the other side, Diddy's defense team had a very different strategy. They decided not to call any witnesses to the stand. Instead, their entire case was focused on creating reasonable doubt about the prosecution's narrative. His lead lawyer, a prominent defense attorney, argued that the government was trying to criminalize a consensual lifestyle. He told the jury that all the sexual activity was part of a swinger lifestyle that all parties willingly participated in. The defense claimed that the women involved were not victims, but active participants who enjoyed the benefits of being in Combs' powerful circle. To bolster their argument, the defense presented evidence of their own. They showed the jury text messages and video clips that they said proved the women's participation was voluntary. These messages anecdotally suggested a friendly and even affectionate relationship between Combs and his accusers at times. The defense lawyers argued that the women were now trying to rewrite history for financial gain. Their strategy was to poke holes in the testimony of the accusers, questioning their motives and their credibility. They insisted that while Combs' lifestyle might be unconventional, it was not criminal. The jury was left to decide which version of the story they believed. After 7 weeks of intense testimony and evidence, the case went to the jury. The world held its breath, waiting for a decision. The deliberations were tense, and reports from the courthouse suggested the jury was struggling to reach a consensus on some of the charges. Finally, on July 2, 2025, the jury announced they had reached a verdict. Sean Combs stood in the courtroom, his face unreadable, as the jury foreperson prepared to read the decision. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. This was the moment that would define the rest of his life and shape his legacy forever. The outcome would send shockwaves through the entertainment industry and the public. The verdict was a split decision, and it was a stunning one that no one fully expected. The jury found Sean Combs not guilty of the most serious charges against him. He was acquitted on 1 count of racketeering conspiracy. This meant the jury did not believe the prosecution had proven that he ran his organization as a criminal enterprise. He was also found not guilty on 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. This was a massive victory for Combs and his defense team. The charges that carried the heaviest potential sentences were now off the table. For the prosecution and the accusers, the acquittals were a devastating blow. They had spent months building a case they believed was ironclad. They had presented emotional testimony and graphic evidence, hoping to secure a conviction on the charges that mattered most. The not guilty verdicts on racketeering and sex trafficking meant the jury was not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Combs had used force or coercion in the way the law defines it. The outcome sparked immediate debate and discussion across the country, with many people questioning how the jury could have reached such a decision in the face of so much public evidence. However, it was not a complete victory for Sean Combs. The jury did find him guilty on 2 counts. While he was acquitted of the headline-grabbing charges, he was convicted on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. These convictions, while less severe than racketeering or sex trafficking, were still federal felonies. So, while Combs avoided a life sentence, he did not walk out of the courtroom a free man. The split verdict left a complicated and messy conclusion to a trial that had been filled with drama, emotion, and disturbing revelations about the private world of a public icon. Understanding why the jury acquitted Sean Combs of the most serious charges comes down to one of the core principles of the American legal system: the burden of proof. For the charges of racketeering and sex trafficking, the prosecution had to prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This is, honestly, a very high standard to meet. It means the jury must be virtually certain that the defendant is guilty. According to reports, the jury was deadlocked on the racketeering charge for a while before ultimately deciding to acquit. This suggests that at least some jurors had lingering doubts about whether Combs' actions legally constituted running a criminal enterprise. The defense team's strategy was expertly designed to create exactly this kind of doubt. They did not need to prove that Combs was innocent. They only needed to convince the jury that the prosecution's story had holes in it. By framing the events as part of a consensual swinger lifestyle, they offered an alternative narrative. They argued that the women were willing participants who enjoyed the lavish lifestyle that came with being in Combs' circle. This narrative, whether true or not, may have been just enough to make some jurors question whether the women were truly forced or coerced in the way the law requires for a sex trafficking conviction. The nature of the evidence also played a critical role. While the witness testimony was incredibly emotional and the 2016 assault video was, damning, the defense was able to counter with evidence of their own. They presented text messages and other communications that seemed to show a more collaborative and friendly relationship between Combs and his accusers. These messages could have been interpreted by the jury as evidence of consent, thereby weakening the prosecution's claims of force and coercion. The defense successfully painted a picture of complex, messy relationships rather than a clear-cut case of a predator and his victims. Ultimately, the jury had to separate their personal feelings about Combs' behavior from the strict legal definitions of the crimes he was charged with. It's possible that the jurors were disgusted by his actions, especially after seeing the assault video, but did not feel the prosecution had provided enough direct evidence to meet the high legal bar for racketeering and sex trafficking. For those charges, the law requires proof of a specific kind of force or fraud. The defense's ability to introduce a plausible alternative narrative, even if it was an unsavory one, was enough to plant the seeds of reasonable doubt and secure the acquittals on the most severe counts. While Sean Combs was acquitted of the most serious charges, he was not declared innocent of all wrongdoing. The jury found him guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. These are violations of a federal law known as the Mann Act. This law makes it a crime to knowingly transport someone across state lines for the purpose of prostitution or any other illegal sexual activity. These charges are different from sex trafficking because they do not require the prosecution to prove force, fraud, or coercion. This is a very important distinction that helps explain the split verdict from the jury. The burden of proof for the Mann Act violations was significantly lower. To secure a conviction, prosecutors only needed to prove that prostitution was a significant or motivating purpose for the interstate travel that Combs arranged for the women. The evidence presented during the trial, including testimony about financial arrangements and the nature of the freak-offs, was likely sufficient for the jury to conclude that this standard had been met. It was a much more straightforward charge to prove. The jury could believe that the women were transported for illegal sexual purposes without necessarily believing they were forced or coerced into participating. Because of these convictions, Sean Combs faces serious consequences. Both counts are federal felonies, and he was immediately taken into custody after the verdict, as he had previously been denied bail. His sentencing is scheduled for October 3, 2025. Each count carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. However, under federal sentencing guidelines, prosecutors have estimated that he will likely face a sentence of around 51 to 63 months, which is about 4 to 5 years in prison. He will also receive credit for the 10 months he has already served while awaiting trial. This means that despite being acquitted of the charges that could have sent him to prison for life, Diddy is now a convicted felon who is heading to federal prison. His life of luxury, power, and freedom has come to an abrupt end. The convictions mark a dramatic fall from grace for a man who was once on top of the world. Even a shorter prison sentence will forever change his life and his legacy. The guilty verdicts ensure that he is held legally accountable for some of his actions, even if it's not for the crimes that drew the most public outrage. Immediately following the verdict, many people began drawing comparisons between the Sean Combs case and the infamous O.J. Simpson trial from the 1990s. The parallels are hard to ignore. Both cases involved extremely famous and wealthy black celebrities who were accused of violent crimes. Both men were acquitted of the most serious charges against them: murder in Simpson's case and racketeering and sex trafficking in Combs' case. These acquittals shocked the public and led to widespread debate about whether justice had truly been served. In both trials, the verdict seemed to stand in stark contrast to the mountain of evidence presented to the public. Public perception is another key area where the two cases align. In the court of public opinion, many people still believe O.J. Simpson was guilty of murder, despite his acquittal. Similarly, a large segment of the public is likely to view Sean Combs as guilty of the abuse and trafficking he was accused of, regardless of the jury's verdict. The 2016 assault video, in particular, has cemented a negative image of Combs in the minds of many. Like Simpson, Combs may forever be seen as someone who got away with it, a perception that will likely follow him for the rest of his life and tarnish his legacy permanently. The legal risks that both men faced after their criminal trials also run parallel. After his acquittal, O.J. Simpson lost a civil lawsuit filed by the families of the victims and was found liable for their deaths. He was ordered to pay millions in damages. Sean Combs has already settled the civil suit with Cassie Ventura and is facing over 50 other civil lawsuits. He will likely face immense financial pressure from these ongoing legal battles. Furthermore, like Simpson, who was later convicted and imprisoned for an unrelated robbery and kidnapping, Combs will be under intense scrutiny from law enforcement. The system will be watching him closely, perhaps waiting for him to make a mistake after he is released from prison. However, there is a crucial difference. Unlike O.J. Simpson, who was acquitted of all criminal charges in his first trial, Sean Combs is now a convicted felon. He was found guilty of 2 federal crimes and is going to prison. This legal finding of guilt separates his case from Simpson's in a fundamental way. While the public may debate his innocence on the more serious charges, the fact remains that a jury of his peers found him guilty of criminal behavior. This conviction provides a level of legal accountability that was absent in the Simpson murder trial, even if many feel it doesn't go far enough. When Sean Combs is eventually released from prison, he will re-enter a world that looks very different from the one he left. His reputation has been shattered. The graphic testimony from his trial, his own admission of violence, and the 2 felony convictions have done irreparable damage to his public image. He had already stepped down as the chairman of his media company, Revolt, back in November 2023. It is highly unlikely that he will be able to return to the entertainment and business worlds in the same capacity. Many brands, artists, and business partners will likely distance themselves from him permanently. He is widely expected to be treated as an outcast or a villain in the industries he once dominated. The name Diddy used to be a symbol of success and celebration. Now it is tied to abuse, exploitation, and criminal convictions. It will be incredibly difficult for him to rebuild his brand. While some loyal fans may stick by him, the broader public and the corporate world will probably keep him at arm's length. His days of securing major endorsement deals, launching new product lines, and being celebrated as a cultural icon are almost certainly over. He will have to navigate a world where he is no longer celebrated but is instead viewed with suspicion and disdain. The future for Combs will also be marked by constant scrutiny. Law enforcement will likely monitor him closely, as is often the case with high-profile individuals who have been convicted of felonies. The media will follow his every move, reporting on his life after prison. He will have lost the privacy he once enjoyed. Any misstep, no matter how small, will be magnified and dissected by the public. He will be living under a microscope, a stark contrast to the life of power and influence he once lived, where he was the one in control of the narrative. Ultimately, the man who once called himself Love will have to confront a legacy that is now defined by darkness. His story will serve as a cautionary tale about the abuse of power and the consequences that can follow, even for the most powerful among us. He will have his wealth, but he will have lost his good name. The future for Sean Combs is one of a fallen icon, a man forced to live with the fallout of his actions. His journey ahead will be one of navigating life as a convicted felon and a public pariah, a far cry from the king of hip-hop he once was. The trial of Sean Diddy Combs has come to a close, but the conversation it started is far from over. The split verdict leaves us with a complicated and, for many, unsatisfying conclusion. On one hand, a jury acquitted him of the most heinous charges, finding that the prosecution did not prove its case for racketeering and sex trafficking beyond a reasonable doubt. On the other hand, that same jury convicted him of 2 federal felonies, ensuring that he will face prison time and be forever branded a convicted criminal. This outcome highlights the significant gap that can exist between public perception and the strict technical requirements of the law. For Sean Combs, the man, the verdict marks a definitive and tragic fall from grace. He built an empire and became a symbol of black excellence and entrepreneurial spirit. His story was one of incredible success. But now, that legacy is permanently stained. The disturbing evidence and testimony from the trial have reshaped his public image into one of a predator who used his immense power to exploit and harm people. Regardless of the acquittals, the court of public opinion has largely delivered its own verdict, and it is a harsh one. He will likely spend the rest of his life as an outcast, a shadow of the influential figure he once was. This case also forces society to have important conversations about power, consent, and celebrity culture. It raises questions about how we hold powerful men accountable and how the legal system handles cases involving allegations of sexual abuse. The trial brought to light the dark underbelly of a world that is often glamorized, showing how fame and wealth can be used as tools of control and coercion. The courage of the women who came forward to share their stories has sparked a necessary dialogue that will hopefully lead to greater awareness and change within the entertainment industry and beyond. In the end, the story of Sean Combs is a cautionary tale with no easy answers. It's a story of a flawed hero who became a villain in the eyes of many. It's a story of a legal system that delivered a nuanced verdict that satisfied almost no one completely. And it's a story that reminds us that justice itself is often complex, imperfect, and subject to interpretation. What is certain is that the empire Diddy built has crumbled, and his name will now be remembered not just for the music he made, but for the devastating harm he caused and the legal battle that defined his final act in the public spotlight.